This is candidate 23003-867 for the module Cinemas of the World. The film sequence will be taken from Bernardo Bertolucci's Il Conformista, 1970. The sequence begins at 1 hour 18 minutes and 45 seconds and finishes at 1 hour 22 minutes and 43 seconds. The mise en scène. Il Conformista is a film that follows Marcello Clerici and his struggle to repress his sexuality and childhood traumas in fascist Italian society. He joins the fascist secret police, and along with another agent, Manganiello, he must carry out the assassination of his ex-professor Quadri. The sequence I am analysing is one of the final scenes before the assassination takes place, and is set in a Parisian dance hall. In this sequence, we are bombarded with a number of themes including sexuality, censorship, comedy, and perhaps most integral to the sequence is the use of light and colour to communicate conflict. This sequence also focuses heavily on the contrast between men and women with regards to gender and sexual fluidity. In this first shot of the sequence, we see the first example of Bertolucci's use of light and colour, as we are given a juxtaposition between the pairs of men and women. Inside the well-lit and warmly coloured dance hall, we have Giulia and Anna, played by Stefania Sandrelli and Dominique Sander. Outside, and shrouded by shadows of blue tint, we see Marcello and Professor Quadri, played by Jean-Louis Trintignant and Enzo Tarascio. As well as being a commentary of Europe's encroaching fascist march on France, colour is also used to distinguish between the two atmospheres present in the dance hall. Most notably in this shot, we see the use of high saturation to accentuate the different tones. It should also be mentioned that Bertolucci went to great lengths to produce this consistent shade of blue in the exterior of the building. It is claimed in the book Making Pictures: A Century of European Cinematography that Bertolucci's cinematographer, Vittorio Storaro, covered the outside of the panes in blue filter paper. Looking at the position of Marcello and Quadri, we see that they are purposefully framed in these rigid and angular panes which are reminiscent of fascist architecture. Their placement in these frames is contrasted to the way that Anna and Giulia smoothly walk out of the shot. It is our first glimpse of the subject of fluidity and how it differs between the sexes. Here we have another comparison between the two pairs, as we see Anna and Giulia gazing intimately at each other. Then there is a cross-cut to a close-up medium shot of Marcello staring disdainfully at Quadri, before the atmosphere between these two becomes even more hostile. Marcello places his coat over the hat rack and uses it to hide and obscure himself in the corner of the bench. Marcello is also seen here removing the only warm-coloured article of clothing. This reminds us of the nature of fascism, which is to remove that which does not reflect its own styles and values. The camera is also at a slightly high angle, emphasizing Marcello's discomfort and vulnerability. There is a constant cutting between these two clips of action, and is disorientating when it comes to establishing a pace. Bertolucci was actually asked in an interview for Sight and Sound, Volume 40, Number 2, whether he broke the action deliberately with his constant cutting, to which he replied that he simply made the film freely and did not do this consciously. Marcello and Quadri, we see Marcello clasping and wringing his hands nervously, as Quadri reveals that the letter was a test, and now he does not believe that Marcello is a true fascist. We cut back to a close-up medium shot of Anna and Giulia, which mirrors the last shot of Marcello, which is then used to show the growing intensity between Anna and Giulia. We see them both dancing to the tango, which is traditionally performed by a man and a woman, and is used to show their defiance to the fascist gender roles. The choice of music is also important, as it is a reference to Bertolucci's 1972 film, The Last Tango in Paris, which also openly explores sexuality and taboo. The colour scheme of red is often used in this sequence and is shown by an extra in the background wearing a flower and an extra to the right of the frame wearing a red dress, and it shows the romance between Anna and Julia. Again we see here the theme of red in the wine that is being placed down on the table and the woman that is about to pass in the background of the frame. As the camera zooms in closer on a dolly, we can see an arc of lights form around Marcello's head and profile, and this is a metaphor for his exposure by Quadri. He has been caught betraying his fascist identity, and the shadows he attempts to hide in have now been illuminated. The photo window pane comes into a shallow focus to reveal Laurel and Hardy. Christopher Wagstaff argues in his BFI guide that this is an homage to Robert Aldrich and his portrayal of George and Childe in his 1968 film The Killing of Sister George. Aldrich presents the two women dressed as Laurel and Hardy as they go to a lesbian bar, the link being that Julia and Anna's homoerotic expression is a mimicking of the presentation of a sexual taboo. I also interpreted a more basic reading of this photo, which has also been picked up by Millicent Marcus in her book Italian Film in the Light of Realism, where she describes Manganiello, played by Gaston Mochin, as the bullying Oliver Hardy and Marcello as the slight snivelling Stan Laurel. I support this view, as we see an example of overacting and drama when Marcello asks Manganiello to deal with Alberi, the chauffeur supplying Marcello's mother with morphine. And now we'll cut back to that clip as a reminder. Particularly in this scene, we're encouraged not to take the duo seriously until the assassination scene, when Manganiello's character reveals its dark side. Here we cross-cut back to Julia with a low-angled shot as the camera tracks her movements. The camera zooms out on a dolly to reveal a wide shot with Anna adopting a masculine position once more, and several red-dressed women steal the focus of the frame to emphasize the passion between the two. This exchange between Marcello and Quadri is commented on by Wagstaff, who notices that Quadri focuses on the aesthetic aspect of the women rather than the meaning of their actions, whereas Marcello is only focused on the women subverting and orders them to stop. This is a metaphor for how the fascist orders the censorship of art forms. We then cut to this medium shot of Anna showing her staring lustfully at Julia. It should also be mentioned that in the same interview mentioned earlier for Sight and Sound, Bertolucci described how the camera appeared as if it was in a dance of its own when it was tracking Julia. This shot is obscured by other actors and is a metaphor for how Anna and Julia have been accepted by this liberal crowd for their individualism, which would be frowned upon in a fascist society. We return to a high-angled shot and hear Julia delivering a monologue to the crowd. It is important to mention how easily she changes between French and Italian, and yet earlier in the film, Manganiello is taunted for only speaking Italian, and we will get that clip up as a reminder. This is perhaps a commentary on how women can more easily be sexually fluid in comparison to men. The farandole begins. The camera tilts upwards to reveal the upper stalls of the dance hall and creates the illusion that they are in a theatre, with those below being on the stage. This would go some way to explaining the exaggerated acting and emotions in this scene. In this shot, we also see the extensive use of lighting techniques. Because claim in their chapter of making pictures a century of European cinematography, that Bertolucci said that the film was lit like a 1930s film studio, even on location shots. This was done to recreate the techniques used in the era in which the film is set. And here the camera tracks Julia once more. We see Marcello and Quadri again, with Quadri being whisked onto the dance floor. In this shot, it is vital to notice that the two are wearing opposing ties. Quadri wears red and Marcello wears blue. This is used to signify their inclinations to liberal and fascist ideals respectively. The Farandole represents the liberal movement, which Quadri joins, and Marcello is left in limbo, neither joining the fascist Manganiello or the Farandole. Julia leads the Farandole outside, showing that she is not restricted by the boundary of the colours. The camera tracks her, and many tables are empty, showing the overwhelming support for both Anna and Julia. The camera pauses briefly here to show the presence of Manganiello. We cut to the high-angled shot once more to show the size of the Farandole and the loneliness of Marcello. We then cut to the medium shot of Marcello restraining himself as he taps his hand, being a metaphor for the way he restrains his homosexual urges. We then match cut to Manganiello, who begins to tap his hand as Marcello stops. Marcello walks timidly across the dance floor, keenly watching out for the other dancers, and his apprehension in walking over to Manganiello reflects his insecurity of his fascist ideals. The pace of the scene slows down as Marcello clearly walks in a delayed manner. We see more overdramatic comedic action as Marcello snatches his arm away flamboyantly from Manganiello. The pace now speeds up as the dancers re-enter the hall. The camera switches to a high-angle shot to show Marcello's vulnerability as he is surrounded by the Farandole. The camera tracks Manganiello, uninterested in helping his fascist comrade. We see an element of comedy again as Marcello timidly and awkwardly tries to avoid his fellow dancers. Wagstaff also points out two important parts of this scene. The first is that of the stomping of feet. It is extra diegetic and does not sync up with the dancers. Its rhythmic pattern emulates jackboots and is a prominent coming war in Europe. Secondly, he points out how this humiliation is a comparison to the scene earlier in the film when Marcello is subject to sexual humiliation by his classmates when he was a child. I will now return to that clip. Finally, we see Marcello surrounded and mocked, which is exactly what he sought to avoid by becoming a fascist. Thank you for watching this presentation.